I've got to bring this to a close to allow time for questions, but let me bring it into what to expect. China's economy, the basis for legitimacy, will not, contrary to some projections, continue to grow forever at 10%. Not possible, won't happen. It's slowed. It's slowed to a level many countries would like, it's maybe 7%. But China is still a poor country. The aggregate numbers are big. Anything you multiply by 1.3 billion gives you a big number. The opposite is also true, the converse is true. Anything you divide by 1.3 gives you a billion, gives you a little number, like per capita GDP. And it's still a poor country. It's now added, it has about 350 million people in the middle class. Very impressive. That means 1 billion aren't there yet. That's a pretty big drag on. And as growth slows, China is entering, not there yet, but it's entering the middle income status, which economists often refer to as the middle income trap. Getting out of middle income and into high income is very hard. One country ever has zoomed right through it, Singapore. Singapore is pretty special in many respects. One is that it's about the size of a small Chinese dinner party. That 1.3 billion versus the few million in Singapore, it's not comparable. According to the World Bank, in 1960, there were 60-some-odd countries in the middle income bracket. As of 2014, 11 have made it out. It's hard. So I think you need to explain why you think China will zoom through this like Singapore and not have the problems that most countries have had. As growth slows, perceptions of the public change. Roughly 60% of China's population has no memory of unsuccessful, humiliated China. There's demographics. They're born after China began its rise, or were less than 10 years old when China began its rise. So the expectations of more than half the population is for continued rapid expansion. It's a population that is overwhelmingly single children. Never had to compete with a cousin, a brother, or sister. Don't have aunts and uncles as part of a structure. But their expectations are high. Growth is slowing. As growth slows, the perception of, I was content to wait for my piece of the pie, but I'm not sure I want to wait anymore because it might not expand. And as that happens, the corruption in the system, the blatant differences between the wealthiest and the poorest becomes less acceptable. So internally, the challenges are enormous. Just to cite one of them. I referred to the youthful population. At the other end, within 10 years, China's over 60 population, guys like me, will exceed the total population of the United States. No social security system. Who takes care of them? One child per family, holding up 4 parents and 8 grandparents. You think that's not pressure on the system to do things? Close, China is not going to continue to grow the way it did. Pressures on the government around growth are increasing. Political science will tell you when you have internal problems, it's often a search for external safety valves here. In China, that's compounded by the importance of nationalism for legitimacy. And calls to stand up for China's sovereignty, China's territorial integrity, stand up to the foreigners, not be pushed around. This is part of the ethos of New China. And it's legitimate. It's legitimate to call upon the government to stand up to Japanese militarists, Tibetan separatists, Americans attempting to all of which has the effect of pushing the government to take actions or make statements in the international arena that look more blustering, more assertive, more troubling. So combine the pressures to say more, to do more things internationally, to not go along with the US-led system now that we're a big, rich country, or not so rich, but at least a big economy, that push the government to do things that I think it knows are counterproductive. And that, in conjunction with the military buildup, unsettles the neighbors. The neighbors don't want to be caught between China and the United States, the rising big power next door, and the maybe declining, but more or less benign, faraway country. They don't want to be caught between the one that their economy is increasingly dependent on and the one that their security depends upon. So they're all trying to hedge. They're trying to hedge with the US. President Obama's rebalance towards Asia policy is a portion of the US hedging and a response to the call for rebalancing. Let me close with saying China is not going to change the international system, at least not for a very long time. And China doesn't want to change the international system, not in the broad way in which it works, because China benefits from that system. And now almost all countries benefit from it. So the other countries China cares about don't want anybody messing with the system now that they've figured it out and are benefiting from it. But the international system has to change. It's predicated on institutions put in place after World War II to fix the problems of the 1930s. It did a fantastic job. It changed the world and is increasingly obsolete. China must have a role in the re-engineering, redesign of the international system, which means it must step up and take some responsibilities for leadership. Thus far, it doesn't want to do that because leaders get criticized. It's perfectly happy to have the current management continue to run things for quite a bit longer, because the only conceivable restructuring doesn't result in more power to the United States. It results in more responsibility for China, and not yet would be the Chinese response. We're not ready, and they're right. Let me stop and invite questions.